All right, welcome to the start of a new week here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know the deal. You know what we ask you to do every day when we put these videos out. Like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, make it nice and easy for you with the subscribing. That button is right down there. It's on like that yellow.com. There's a little blue rectangle. Click that thing to subscribe. Turn on your notifications. You'll get an alert sent to your phone all the time. Well, not all the time, but whenever we release a new video, or go live for one of our live streams right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We did that last week with the post-game show on Wednesday night after what game was that? The Duke game. We'll do it again this Wednesday night after the Louisville game. Our weekly Panther-Lair show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30. We'll push that back until after that game ends. We'll go live and talk about it. Talk about what we saw, Pitt, Louisville. And so that'll be something to look forward to. Don't know what time we're going to start. So you want to make sure that you subscribe and turn on the notifications, and then you'll get an alert sent to you whenever we start. So you won't miss it. You can be part of the post-game show with your comments and your questions. We have a chat screen that shows up here on the right-hand side of the screen. You can put your comments and your questions in there. We have a little back and forth conversation about the game. It's a lot of fun. We enjoy doing them after the football games. We certainly enjoy doing them after the basketball games. We'll do it here and there. Not going to do every hoops game, but certainly the ones that line up on Wednesday nights, we'll do those for sure. Coming out of the weekend, actually going into the weekend, on Friday I wrote 3-2-1 column on Panther-Lair.com. We have sort of a format for that thing. 3 things we know, 2 questions we have, 1 prediction. And obviously we talked a good deal about basketball. Pitt basketball in that column. It was fresh off the losses to Clemson and Duke, and kind of questions about where the team was, where they stood at 4-2 after a 4-0 start, if they were sliding a little bit, what was going to happen. It was a disappointment at Duke because of a game, an opportunity that they had for themselves, and they let it slip away, a chance to get a good win on the road, and they let it slip away, and that was disappointing. And you wonder how they were going to bounce back. And we talked about football stuff as well in the column. I mean, it's always sort of a mix of topics in those 3-2-1 columns. And I finished off the 3-2-1 column last Friday with a prediction. The prediction was Pitt would get to 7-2 in ACC games. That would be their best start ever as a member of the ACC. To do that, they would have to win 3 in a row. They would have to win at Georgia Tech, they would have to win at Louisville, and they'd have to beat Florida State at home. I was probably going out on a bit of a limb with that, but at least I got up to a good start when Pitt beat Georgia Tech on Saturday, 71-60, the game in Atlanta, and it was a bounce-back win. And that's what Pitt needed. They needed a bounce back from the back-to-back losses. They got off to the really good 4-0 start, some impressive wins in there. They beat Carolina, they beat Virginia, but then they had a couple losses. They lost at home to Clemson. They lost at Duke. And, not that I don't think anyone thought the wheels were going to fall off, but they were certainly in the midst of a tough stretch of the schedule. And they stumbled a little bit. And it wasn't that they were bad losses. They were disappointing losses because in both games they had an opportunity to win. They weren't bad losses based on the opponents, but they were certainly each game presented a chance to notch a good win, and bolster your resume. Because we're legitimately talking about this team in terms of resume. The topic of a tournament resume is relevant for Pitt basketball right now, which in and of itself is a huge storyline. We are watching the bubble watch. We are watching the bracketology and legitimately looking for Pitt because Pitt is legitimately being included. It's amazing. They're like showing up as like an 11 seed in some instances. And, a game like Clemson, a game like Duke, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to pad your resume, which is very much something that we're going to be looking at and talking about, I think, through the rest of the regular season, which is crazy because, as I say, we haven't been here in a long time. But they lost those games. It was disappointing, but not the end of the world, provided they bounced back, and bounced back they did. 71-60 win at Georgia Tech registers as tied for the 3rd biggest margin of victory in a road ACC game for Pitt since joining the conference. In 2014, they won at NC State by 12. It was their first ACC game, actually. They won at I think it was. But either way, it was in their first season as a member of the ACC. They beat NC State on the road by 12. 2 years later, Kevin Stallings? Is it Stallings in 15-16? No, it must have been Jamie Dixon's last year. Won at Syracuse by 14, the biggest road win in an ACC game that Pitt has had since joining the conference. Kevin Stallings did in his first year. He got an 83-72 win at Boston College, an 11-point win. And then you fast forward to this season, to Saturday, for the 11-point win at Georgia Tech. You have 4 games that Pitt has won by double digits since joining the ACC. 4 road conference games that Pitt has won by double digits since joining the ACC, and the Georgia Tech game being number 4. So you're in a bit of a rare company on that front. I thought that was an interesting sidebar. And just to kind of go a step further, if you look at Pitt's record in road ACC games since joining the conference, obviously, from 2013, from the 13-14 season up through last year, they had 22 wins on the road. And out of those 22, 7 of them came in the first season. They went 7-2 in that first year after they joined the conference in road games. Since then, they have not won more than 3 road conference games in any season. Then they've had a few where they only won 2, and they've had a couple where they didn't win any road conference games at all. They've already got 3 this season with NC State, Syracuse, and now Georgia Tech. And they got plenty more to play. Another 6 road games, I guess? Because Duke was also in there, so they've played 4. They have 6 more ACC road games, opportunity to push closer to that 7-win total, which was the record back in 2013-14, or at least get close to it. So, but I don't think there's necessarily anything where you say, oh, they're road warriors, or there's something better about playing on the road. I think it's just the matter of this being a pretty good team. But they needed to bounce back. They had to bounce back after the Duke game, and they came out and they did it. They played a pretty strong first half against Georgia Tech. Only 1 turnover. They got out-rebounded, which is sort of natural at this point, and we'll talk about it in a second. They gave up 8 3-pointers to Georgia Tech, who is not traditional, or hasn't been a great or prolific 3-point shooting team this season. But they still had a 4-point lead at halftime. They go into the second half. They get up by 9 or so with about 9 minutes to go, and then they ran into a scoring drought that took almost 6 minutes off the clock without scoring a basket. A bit of a problem, but they were still able to make the baskets they needed to make, and they were still able to hold on and win the game. Nike Sibande with a huge performance again for Pitt coming off the bench, and I guess we would start with Nike Sibande. This game, he goes, 21 points, shoots 7 of 12 from the floor, 3 of 6 from 3, he grabbed 6 rebounds, only had 1 turnover in those minutes, and there's been a conversation about whether Nike Sibande should move into the starting lineup, and, particularly should he move ahead of Greg Elliott? Should Greg Elliott be the player who comes off the bench, and should Sibande start in games? And I think there's a few things to look at on that front. Number one, and what I always say, every time people have a conversation about, well, this guy should be starting, if you look at Saturday's game, Sibande played 35 minutes and Greg Elliott played 25. That's the more important number than whether you get that little asterisk next to your name about whether you started or not. It's about who plays the minutes. It's about who's on the court the most. That's what's relevant. Those are the guys who are impacting the game the most. Sibande plays 10 more minutes than Elliott played. Now, Elliott struggled in his minutes, for sure. He was 1 of 7 from the floor. He didn't make a 3-pointer. He only scored, 4 points, and 2 of them came on free throws. He had 5 rebounds and an assist and a steal, but not a lot encouraging, and he's been struggling. He hasn't found his shot. I think he's got 1 3-pointer in the last 2 games combined. And so, Nike Sibande, meanwhile, has been playing really, really well. So, yeah, Sibande has been outplaying Greg Elliott. But as long as he's getting more minutes, and it's not just that it is that he's getting more minutes, but it's also, look at the end of the game, Sibande is on the court for the final, 4 or 5 minutes. They keep Sibande out there. Nelly Cummings had to come out because he had 4 fouls. When Cummings goes back in, he replaces Elliott, not Sibande. When they've got their final 5 out there to try and close out the game, it's Nelly Cummings, Jamarius Burton, Blake Hinson, Federico, and Nike Sibande, not Greg Elliott. And so that tells me, and it should tell you, that at least on Saturday, and I think probably we'll see this more often going forward, when Jeff Capel wanted to close out the game, Nike Sibande was the guard he went with over Greg Elliott. That, to me, is far more important than who starts the game. Now, maybe eventually Capel will change it up. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to have a three-point shooter that comes off the bench and provides that spark. I mean, we've seen guys like Ronald Ramon or Ashton Gibbs flourish in that role early in their careers. But ultimately, as I still might bring Sibande off the bench for that spark. But as long as he's playing more minutes, if he's playing better and he gets more minutes, that's what's important. You want your best players on the court. You want the guy, not necessarily, it doesn't matter if they're on the court at the beginning of the game. You want your best players on the court throughout the game, and you want them there to close out the game. And that tells me that Nike Sibande is being properly valued and evaluated, used on this team. He was huge in the first half, helped, carry the team. He had a huge basket on an and one in the second half, which actually broke Pitt's scoreless streak or bucketless streak with about 3 minutes and 20 seconds to go. Federico got a steal, and Sibande took the ball and went coast to coast, drew a foul, converted an and one, made it a 61-53 game, and ultimately put that thing away. But he was the big story. I'll tell you what, Nelly Cummings, scoring 11 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. Not as many assists as you would like to see. He had foul trouble that limited him in the first half. He ends up playing 23 minutes in this game and was really the spark plug in the second half. All 11 points come in the second half. And I think that really sort of... Now, Nike Sibande's the wild card here, but it really kind of reconfirmed for me that this team, when they're at their best, they have Nelly Cummings going, they have Jamarius Burton going, and they have Blake Hinson going. And Hinson is in a bit of a rut right now. I don't think there's any other way to say it. Whether it's at the free throw line, whether it's from the floor, he's not finding things as easily as he found early in the season. Maybe teams are figuring him out. Maybe teams just have a scouting plan for him and a scouting report, and they know what they want to do to try to defend him. But he scores 13 on Saturday, but it takes him 14 field goal attempts to get there. He goes 2 of 7 from outside. Another, a couple of missed free throws out there. He either needs to add something to his game. Maybe they need to run something new for him, do something new with him, or he just needs to kind of remember what he does well and kind of get back to it. He needs to keep shooting. I don't think there's any question about that. I think he needs to maintain that confidence and believe the shots are going in and keep putting them up. But they need him to get back to the level he was playing even early in ACC play, let alone earlier this season. Because this team's at its best when those 3 guys, Burton, Cummings, and Hinson, are really rolling. Now you add in Nike Sibande as sort of a wild card, and you get a pretty dominant lineup, I think, with those 4 guys if they're all playing well. If they're all a threat to score just about any time from anywhere and in any way, that's pretty tough to defend. If they also do this thing, and I don't know, not everybody does this. It's sort of a unique kind of revolutionary basketball concept. But if they do this thing where they, like, one guy has the ball and then he takes it and propels it to another guy, it's like, I think it's like a pass. If he passes the ball, if they could pass the ball and move the ball and get the defense moving, I bet they might even get more open shots and better shot opportunities and better driving opportunities. I don't know. It might be something worth trying. Because a lot of times, this offense kind of just looks like one guy standing there looking for an opportunity to drive and either go to the basket or pull up for a jump shot. And a lot of times that works. I'm not going to say that that's a flawed plan 65 to 75% of the time. It can be pretty effective. They've been pretty effective with it. But it can also lead you down a deep, dark path that they went down at Duke when they couldn't grab any offensive rebounds off their baskets. And quite frankly, they had damn near 6 minutes without a field goal in the game at Georgia Tech. I mean, the reality is they're up 9 points, 57-48, with 9:06 left to play in the game. They don't score another basket until that Sibande, coast to coast, fast break, layup, and 1 with 3:20 to go. 5 minutes and 44 seconds without a field goal. And, as I was watching this game back yesterday, I said, it's happening again. You know what I mean? This scoring drought that we saw in the Clemson game, we saw it in the Duke game. The Duke game was even more pronounced than this. The Clemson game a little bit less. But even some of their wins, they've had these scoring droughts. And you're going to have some stretches where the ball doesn't go in. You're going to have some stretches where you don't score. You can't regularly go 6 minutes without a basket. I don't think that's a recipe for success. It seems like you're sort of tempting fate there. Now, it was to Pitt's good fortune that Georgia Tech only scored 5 points over that stretch. That they went from being down 9 to never really, getting it closer than 5 or so. And that's actually what it was. With about 5:42 to go, it was 58-53. And they didn't score. Neither team scored for the next 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So, fortunately for Pitt, Georgia Tech couldn't capitalize when Pitt went into the scoring drought. But not everybody's going to be so, forgiving as Georgia Tech was. Georgia Tech's not very good. Duke was able to take advantage. Clemson was able to take advantage. Miami will probably be able to take advantage. Wake Forest might be able to take advantage. North Carolina. I mean, just looking down the teams that they're still have to play, Virginia Tech could take advantage. North Carolina could take advantage. Now, maybe Syracuse won't. Maybe Notre Dame won't. Maybe Louisville won't. Maybe Georgia Tech won't again when Pitt plays them at home. But some of these better teams are going to take advantage, and you can't afford to go into that rut. And that's not entirely a fault of the guards just trying to take over the game and drive and do everything themselves, but that's a part of it. And it does seem like when they fall into these scoring droughts, there's a lot of these one-and-done possessions. A drive that, they draw contact, but they don't get the call, and the ball doesn't go in the basket, and the other team gets the rebound, and now you're defending with 4 at the other end because one guy who drove is sort of saying, where was my foul? Well, there was no foul, and the other team's about to score. Or it's a pull-up jumper that goes off the rim. Those shots fall a lot, and it's exciting when they do. Those crazy threes are exciting when they fall. But when they fall, when they don't, and you don't offensive rebound, you get into some of these scoring droughts. And like I say, they were able to survive it against Georgia Tech because Georgia Tech isn't very good. But I don't know if they're going to be able to survive against some of these other teams. Now, fortunately for Pitt, when you run down the rest of the schedule, I think they have, so what, they're, 7 games in now. They have 13 games left. 6 of those 13 games are against teams that have won 2, 1, or 0 ACC games so far. They have 2 games against Louisville. They have winless in conference play. They have a game against Boston College. They only have 2 wins. They have a game against Virginia Tech, who has 1, Georgia Tech, who has 1, and Notre Dame, who has 1. So 6 out of your 13 games, you should have an advantage because those teams haven't been very good through 7 conference games so far. They have 2 more games against Florida State, who's 3-4. So, again, sub 500 in conference play. And so you should have a bunch of these games where even if you go into one of those droughts, as long as you played well for the other 34 minutes, 35 minutes of the game, you should be able to survive it because you're not playing a great opponent. But they have 2 games against Miami, who's 5-2. They have a game against Wake Forest, who's 5-2. They have Carolina, who's 4-3. Syracuse even is 5-2 in conference. I kind of lumped them into that lower group because Pitt beat them, but Orange stringing together a couple wins. So I don't know if you're always going to be able to get away with that. I guess so. You should probably try to avoid it. That's still a little bit of a concern that this team that relies so much on offense, it doesn't have a lot that can make up for it on rebounding when the offense falters. This team relies so much on the offense that when the offense does go into a hole, they don't have a lot of recourse. There's not a lot they can do other than sort of hope the other team doesn't make baskets. That sort of feels like the plan right now, which probably isn't the best kind of plan. The rebounding, I don't know. I mean, obviously the front court is a problem, but I mean, they got out rebounded by, what's his name? Davon Smith, who had 11 rebounds, for Georgia Tech. And so he's like 6 foot tall. I feel like, yes, there's an issue that Federico and Guillermo Diaz-Graham are not the biggest guys. They're tall, but they're not, they're skinny. They're not strong. And that's an issue. But they're also just getting beat. Jeff Capel talks about how they need to gang rebound. They need their guards involved. They're just getting beat. And I don't know if it's a matter of technique, of positioning, of effort, of 1-2, whatever you want to call it. They're getting beat on the boards. And it is a problem, particularly when they fall into those stretches. Look, if you're not going to make your shots, you better get the offensive rebound so you can get another throw at it. So that's something to keep an eye on. But again, this schedule is forgiving. And like I said, I predicted them to win these 3 games. They got 1 down. They got 2 more to go. Starting with Louisville on the road on Wednesday night, and then Florida State at home on Saturday. And those are games they should win. Louisville's 0-7 in conference. Florida State's 3-4. Should win those games. And if you have Cummings, if he's going, if Burton is going, if Hinson is going, and if Sibande keeps playing like he has, they should be in pretty good shape. They should be able to build themselves a cushion that if that offensive drought comes, they can survive it. And they should be able to build themselves a cushion that overcomes a lack of offensive rebounding and whatever success the other team has rebounding on the offensive glass. The other thing we have to talk about with Pitt basketball is the John Hugley situation. Hugley announced on Saturday, shortly before Pitt's game at Georgia Tech, that that he's not going to play the rest of the season. That's his plan. They're going to try and seek a red shirt. I'm sure there are different ways to. It's the best word for it. There are certain ways to sort of petition the NCAA and ways to kind of phrase the situation or present the situation that it might merit a red shirt. Hugley cited mental and physical recovery. Since his absence, Jeff Capel has said, I think, a few times that it's not injury related, which would seem to take out the physical side of it. And I think it's pretty clearly a mental issue. And what that is and what that could mean, I mean, quite frankly, it's none of my business. It's none of your business. He's not in the right space to play right now. And you can be a tough guy and say, hey, man, suck it up, go out there and play basketball. But the reality is it's a human being. And if he is not in the right place to be able to go out and do it, to be able to go out and play, and if he feels like it could even be harmful for him, emotionally, mentally, then he's got to do what's best for him. And I have no doubt that he's going to have the full support of Jeff Capel and the Pitt basketball program and the Pitt athletic department and University of Pittsburgh, whoever it is that he needs support from, whoever's in a position to support him, I believe will give him 100% support to do what he needs to do to get back to a good place in his life, for whatever that means, for whatever that counts as, whatever that is to John Hugley, he's going to have the support to do it. In the meantime, it sort of confirms what I think was a growing suspicion, that he might not be on the court again this year. And I mean, Jeff Capel was asked last week, is it possible that John might not play again this season? He said, I don't know. I think that left the door pretty wide open for the possibility that Hugley might not get on the court again. Sure enough, there he goes. And so, I guess it's good to have some sort of certainty to the situation, that it's definite that he's not going to be playing again. It's certainly disappointing. It's a blow to the team. I mean, in terms of the competitiveness of the team, how the team is going to fare in the ACC, and all the things that ultimately we follow this program for to see what kind of success they'll have. It's a blow to that, because he would help them. When we talk about the rebounding, we talk about the play around the basket, we talk about the kind of player that they don't have right now and the presence they don't have right now. It's John Hugley. I mean, Hugley is that guy. He was supposed to be that guy who provided that presence around the basket. He was the one who was supposed to feed the shooters, and the shooters were the ones who were supposed to draw attention away from Hugley so he could have more favorable matchups under the hoop. It was all supposed to work together in a certain way. Now it's not. Now they've found ways to make it work without Hugley, and they're going to have to continue on that path for the next 13 regular season games and whatever the postseason might bring. I guess we wish the best for John Hugley, and whatever that means for him, whatever the path is for him, hopefully he finds what he's looking for. Pitt, meanwhile, is going to keep moving forward. 12-6 overall, 5-2 in the ACC, tied for second, I guess it is. I just had the standings up. Yeah, tied with a whole bunch of teams, as a matter of fact. Miami, Virginia, Wake Forest, Syracuse. Pitt would have the advantage over Virginia and Syracuse, so I guess they're tied with Miami and Wake Forest because they haven't played those two teams yet. It's a good spot to be. It's a good spot to be. You're being talked about as being, in early bracketology. You've got a spot in the NCAA tournament, and you're now playing games that matter. I mean, every game matters, and you're watching scoreboards to see if one of your opponents, one of the teams you beat, or even one of the teams you lost to, if they get a good win, because that improves your resume. They move up or they move down, whatever it is. It's a fun place to be in the middle of January. We haven't quite been here in quite some time. So I hope you're enjoying it. It's been fun to watch. It was obviously good for the team to get a bounce back on Saturday. Now they have to do it again. They have to build on what they did and ideally do it without any 6-minute scoring droughts. But all right, well, I hope you had a great weekend. I hope you enjoyed the Pitt basketball game, all the NFL games, and everything like that. We're glad you could come back to us here on the Morning Pitt on a Monday morning. Hope it's a good morning for you, and we will be back again tomorrow to talk more Pitt football, basketball, and recruiting topics. We got a lot to talk about on that front, actually. We're going to have plenty to talk about tomorrow, particularly in the transfer portal. So have a good Monday, and we'll be back right here for the Morning Pitt tomorrow morning on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.